They didn't understand you when you chose distance over attention. They mistook your silence for weakness, your calm for confusion, your solitude for loneliness. They thought your refusal to explain yourself meant you had no depth, when in truth it meant you had too much. You were not interested in being legible to people who were never going to read you properly. You chose to withhold, not out of fear, but out of power. They wanted you accessible so they could study you, categorize you, diminish you. You denied them that privilege. Now the distance they mocked is the same distance that makes them restless. They replay moments, realizing they should have paid attention when you spoke, realizing they should have valued your presence when you were there. Their regret is not about losing you. It is about knowing they never truly saw you in the first place. They didn't understand that your detachment was not indifference but discipline. You knew what to give your energy to, and you refused to water barren soil. They called you cold. They called you heartless. But now they see that your boundaries protected you from being consumed by people who only wanted to take. What they once resented about you, they now envy. Because while they burned themselves out trying to be liked by everyone, you invested only where it mattered. You stayed intact, while they shattered into pieces seeking approval from the world. Their regret comes from realizing the control they never had over you was the very control they should have been building inside themselves. They didn't understand that your silence was sharper than their noise. They waited for you to argue, to defend, to react, to prove them wrong in the moment. You gave them nothing, and that nothing was devastating, because silence forces people to wrestle with their own reflection. In your silence, their insecurities screamed louder than anything you could have said. Now they regret mistaking that silence for weakness. They see it for what it truly was, restraint. They see it as the blade you kept hidden until the right time. And nothing cuts deeper than realizing you lost to someone who never even had to raise their voice. They didn't understand that your growth would be invisible at first. They assumed you were stuck because you weren't showcasing every step, because you weren't screaming your progress. They measured themselves against what was visible, not realizing the work you were doing in the dark. While they sought validation, you sought evolution. Now they regret laughing when you chose discipline over indulgence, patience over distraction, focus over noise. Because the version of you standing now makes their version of success look small. They regret doubting someone who was building in silence, because silence builds legacies while noise builds nothing. They didn't understand that your refusal to bend to their illusions was freedom. They wanted you trapped in roles they had written for you. Easy to control, easy to dismiss, easy to define. But you refused the script. You wrote your own. And by doing that, you revealed how powerless their expectations truly were. Now they regret underestimating your independence. Because people who cannot control you will always regret not appreciating you when they had access. They regret it now, not because they suddenly love you, but because they realize you no longer need their approval to breathe. They didn't understand that your endurance was rooted in conviction. They thought you would fold under pressure, dating, collapse under betrayal, or abandon your path when the road grew hard. But you didn't. You absorbed every blow, carried every scar, and turned it into fuel. They regret assuming pain would break you, because now they see pain forged you into something unshakable. They regret laughing at your struggles, because those struggles became your strength. And when they look at you now, they cannot deny the endurance that turned you into someone they can't compete with. They didn't understand that your detachment from chaos was strategy. They lived addicted to drama, addicted to circles of envy and noise. They wanted you entangled in their mess so they could watch you stumble. But you stepped away, you kept your distance. You invested in clarity instead of conflict. Now they regret mistaking your refusal to engage for cowardice. Because you never feared the battle, you simply chose the war worth fighting. And while they wasted energy chasing every argument, you conserved yours for the moves that would matter most. Their regret is born from exhaustion, while your strength comes from strategy, aiding. They didn't understand that your absence would be louder than your presence. They assumed walking away meant you lost, But your absence created a silence that burned them more than your words ever could. They regret underestimating the power of distance. Because now, every room they enter feels different without you. Every circle they form feels incomplete. They see now that your presence gave value to spaces they thought you needed. Your absence revealed who truly needed who. And that realization eats at them every day. They didn't understand that your awareness was constant. They thought their plots, their whispers, their deceit could escape your eye. But you were always watching. You saw through the masks, you noticed the shifts, you understood the patterns. You didn't expose them immediately, which is why they thought you were blind. But now they regret believing they fooled you. Because when you finally replied, when you finally revealed your awareness, it shattered the circle they thought was secure. Their regret comes not just from being exposed, but from realizing they had been transparent to you the entire time. They laughed at you because they couldn't label you. That laughter was never joy. It was defense. People laugh when they do not understand. They use humor as a shield against the discomfort of facing something they can't categorize. You were not like them, and that unsettled them. They tried to box you into titles, roles, or stereotypes, but every time you slipped through. You were too serious to be mocked, too calm to be rattled, too consistent to be dismissed. Laughter was their way of reducing you to something small enough for them to handle. But when they realized the joke never landed on you, when they saw you didn't bend under mockery, that laughter faded into silence. And silence is where envy grows. They laughed because they thought ridicule could weaken you. They thought pointing fingers, creating jokes, and mocking your difference would make you doubt yourself. But you didn't. You let them laugh, because you knew laughter is shallow when it isn't rooted in truth. You stayed steady while their jokes revealed their own ignorance. They laughed in groups because alone they had no courage. But even their groups couldn't stop what was coming. Over time, your discipline turned their mockery into motivation. You grew sharper while they grew bitter. And when your results became undeniable, they had nothing left to say. That is when laughter turned to envy, and envy is far deadlier than mockery. They couldn't label you, so they tried to dismiss you. Labels make people comfortable because labels define limits. If they could call you a failure, they could measure your worth against their own fragile success, aiding. But your growth made every label false. You refused to fit into the categories they offered. You were not broken, you were not weak, you were not average. You became the kind of person who rewrites expectations rather than lives inside them. And because they couldn't define you, they feared you. That fear hid beneath their laughter. But fear always reveals itself through envy. The more you thrived, the more they saw the truth. They hadn't destroyed you, they had built you. They tried to destroy your spirit with words. They thought enough laughter, enough ridicule, enough dismissal would bury your confidence. But you weren't built from their approval. You were built from scars, from endurance, from battles they never saw. Their laughter became white noise to you, and your silence in response became unbearable to them. They started realizing you weren't playing the same game. You didn't need their validation, and you didn't fear their ridicule. That immunity is what broke them, because when someone cannot be shamed, they cannot be controlled. And that realization is what turned their laughter into envy. In relationships, they laughed at your standards. They mocked your boundaries, made jokes about your solitude, treated your discipline as obsession. They thought your difference made you fragile. But your boundaries are the reason you were never destroyed by the things that consumed them. They mocked what they didn't understand, only to realize later those very standards built a life they could never touch. They envied the peace you created, the strength you maintained, the clarity you carried. Their laughter was just a mask for their longing, and their envy was the confession they could no longer hide. In life, society laughs at what it cannot label. People laugh at dreamers, at visionaries, at anyone who dares to live outside the script. They laughed at you because you refused to follow their steps, refused to settle, refused to conform. They laughed because you scared them. And when you succeeded, when you proved their ridicule wrong, laughter became regret, and regret turned to envy. They realized too late that the one they mocked had surpassed them. They envied what they couldn't destroy, and that envy became their torment. You didn't need revenge. Your life became the punishment they couldn't escape. The psychology of their laughter is rooted in insecurity. People laugh when they want to feel superior without earning it. They mocked you to elevate themselves in the eyes of others. But their envy later revealed that deep down, they knew you were ahead. Laughter was a disguise for the fear that they were watching someone who would leave them behind. And when you did, that fear became reality. Gating envy is born when people realize their ridicule did not stop you. It fueled you. Their envy is the echo of their failure to destroy what was stronger than their attacks. They envied your ability to rise without them. They envied your resilience, your independence, your refusal to crumble. Envy isn't admiration. It's silent rage that someone else succeeded where you expected them to fail. They thought their ridicule would break you, but instead it hardened you. Every laugh was a spark that lit your discipline. Every dismissal became weight on your shoulders that made you stronger. Their envy is not about what you have. It is about what you survived. They cannot destroy what has already been forged in fire. Now, when they see you, they remember their laughter. They remember the jokes, the mockery, the arrogance. But they also see the reality that you are still standing, sharper than ever, untouchable in ways they never imagined. And that contradiction is unbearable to them. Their laughter now tastes like regret. Their envy poisons them quietly. And they cannot undo it, because they cannot destroy what they failed to break when they had the chance. They valued appearances while you valued alignment, and the contrast was always going to expose them. They wanted to look polished, wanted to look powerful, wanted to appear successful in every room they entered. Their lives became costumes stitched together by fear of being seen for what they truly were. But you never played that game. You focused on alignment, living by the same values in private and in public, making sure your choices reflected your principles rather than a performance. Appearances impress quickly, but they collapse under weight. Alignment grows slowly, but it never cracks. That is why today they choke on the gap between both. They look perfect on the surface, yet feel hollow within. You may not have always looked impressive, but you were building a reality that matched your truth. Now the difference burns them, because your peace exposes their emptiness. They placed value on perception because they feared truth. They cared more about being seen as loyal than actually being loyal. They wanted to appear kind, but only when eyes were on them. They tried to look brave, but never stood firm when challenges arrived. They built their worth on the illusions of applause, chasing the approval of others while ignoring the dissonance inside. You rejected that. You wanted alignment over approval. You didn't care about looking loyal. You cared about being loyal. You didn't aim to appear disciplined. You built discipline into your bones. That difference grew invisible at first. They looked ahead of you while the world watched, but inside they were crumbling. Over time, alignment always wins because it outlasts appearances. Their regret comes from realizing the attention they worshipped now suffocates them, while the alignment you protected has given you freedom they cannot imitate. They thought the goal was to be seen as strong. You knew the goal was to be strong when no one is watching. They lifted appearances like masks, constantly adjusting depending on who was in the room. They dressed up insecurity in expensive clothes, painted fear as arrogance, and decorated instability with noise. They never realized how heavy that performance would become. You moved differently. You aligned your daily actions with your long-term vision. You let your habits speak instead of your mouth. You didn't need costumes or pretenses. That's what broke them. Because people who rely on appearances cannot breathe in the presence of someone who is fully aligned. Their show loses value next to your truth. They choke now, not because you tried to expose them, but because alignment always exposes appearances by contrast. In relationships, they valued appearances while you valued alignment. They wanted love that looked perfect in photos, loyalty that looked convincing in public, intimacy that looked inviolable to outsiders. You wanted depth. You wanted honesty. You wanted actions that matched words, consistency that lived in silence, loyalty that held even when no one was there to applaud. At first, their relationships looked grand while yours looked quiet. But appearances fade quickly when tested by betrayal or time. They now choke on that gap, because while their love collapsed under the pressure of truth, your connections remain unshaken. Alignment doesn't need the crowd. It thrives when the crowd disappears. That's why they regret mocking you. Because they see now that appearance-based love is fragile, but aligned love survives everything. They worshipped quick validation. They wanted to look successful before they were. They wanted applause without the hours of work, results without the discipline, titles without the foundation. They rushed to show what they hadn't earned. You moved differently. You valued alignment over speed. You were willing to let results come slowly, as long as they came honestly. You didn't need to brag. You didn't need to stage wins. You let your work speak at the right time. That patience created a permanent foundation. They are choking now because their staged success is cracking under weight, while your aligned success continues to rise. They envy it but cannot replicate it, because replication requires integrity, and integrity was the one thing they never valued. The psychology of appearances is fragile. When people chase appearances, they are enslaved to approval. They become addicted to being seen, to being validated, to being envied. That addiction becomes a cage, one they cannot escape without losing their identity. You broke free by valuing alignment. You built in silence, detached from the need to constantly prove. Your identity wasn't tied to applause. That's why you remain unshakable now. They choke because they are still slaves to perception, trapped in an endless cycle of seeking validation. They know alignment would free them, but freedom feels terrifying to someone addicted to masks. They laughed at your slowness once. They mocked your discipline, called you dull, called you detached. They thought the game was about shining brighter in the moment. But the game was never about the moment. It was about endurance. You endured because alignment gave you stamina, while appearances drained them quickly. They thought you were behind. They thought they had won. But today, their envy burns because you stand grounded, while they scramble to hold together the illusion they built. They choke because envy always suffocates when it stares at truth. And your truth is undeniable now. They wanted to be admired. You wanted to be aligned. Admiration fades with time, but alignment compounds with every choice. They wanted noise. You wanted clarity. They wanted the spotlight. You wanted direction. The difference grew wider every year, and now they can no longer deny it. Their admiration came with emptiness. Your alignment came with fulfillment. They choke now because envy does not allow them to enjoy their own lives. They stare at you and regret every moment they invested in appearances instead of real growth. They laugh less now. They whisper more. And the whispers are envy disguised as criticism. Your alignment makes you untouchable. They cannot destroy what is built on truth. They can mock it, envy it, or try to imitate it, but they cannot break it. Their appearances made them fragile, easy to fracture with time, easy to expose under pressure. They wanted to control perception. You chose to control reality, and reality always swallows perception in the end. That is why they choke. Because deep down, they know you built what they pretended to have. You lived what they only performed. You became what they wanted to appear as. Confusion breeds arrogance because people mistake noise for knowledge. They confuse complexity with intelligence, mistaking their ability to speak in circles as proof of depth. They cover their lack of foundation with overconfidence, building castles in the air and crowning themselves kings of nothing. You watch them talk, watch them inflate themselves, watch them laugh at those who didn't follow their tangled illusions. They thought their ability to confuse meant they had control. But confusion always eats itself. Arrogance built on haze eventually collapses when clarity arrives. And you didn't fight them on their battlefield. You didn't argue with their noise. You chose clarity. That clarity grew sharp and undeniable until their arrogance had no choice but to kneel. Because arrogance cannot stand when truth cuts through every illusion it hides behind. They relied on confusion to hold power. In relationships, they kept you uncertain, dangling affection, mixing words, twisting meanings. They thought keeping you guessing made them superior. They laughed when you questioned yourself, proud that they could make you doubt your own instincts. But confusion doesn't last forever. You stopped playing their game. You pulled yourself out of the fog. You found clarity, and once you found it, their arrogance dissolved. They thought power lived in deception, but power lives in awareness. And awareness makes confusion irrelevant. Their arrogance is now dust because they are faced with the painful truth. You were never blind. You were only patient. Confusion gives manipulators room to act bold. When people don't understand the truth, those who pretend to know appear intelligent. They thrive in the haze, pretending to be masters of complexity. They want others to nod, to agree, to trust their words without question. Arrogance is always born in that shadow. But clarity is light, and when light shines, arrogance shrinks. You carried that light within you. You studied, you observed, you learned. You didn't just accept noise as truth. You dug until truth revealed itself. That effort gave you clarity. And when you finally spoke, every word burned through the fog they created. They had to kneel, not out of respect, but out of defeat. Because arrogance has no reply to truth that is undeniable. In life, arrogance grows fastest in environments of confusion. People act like experts in topics they barely understand. They parade false knowledge to appear important. You encountered this again and again. At first, you may have believed them, thinking they truly knew more. But over time, you saw the cracks. You realized confidence without substance always reveals itself. You began valuing clarity over appearances, and that shift turned you into a weapon. While others chased the applause of arrogance, you chased the discipline of clarity. Now they kneel not because you demanded it, but because reality forced them to. Truth always has the final word. In friendships, confusion becomes a shield for betrayal. They keep things vague. They blur lines. They speak without precision so they can escape accountability. Their arrogance grows in that space, convincing themselves they are clever for deceiving you. But clarity exposes. You learn to ask better questions, to see through half answers, to cut through excuses. That awareness shattered their illusion of control. Their arrogance, once loud, now silent. Because clarity forces accountability, and accountability makes arrogance bow. You didn't need to fight. You only needed to see, and seeing turned their games into dust. Confusion and arrogance are temporary, but clarity is eternal. That is why clarity is feared. People who thrive on manipulation fear the one who sees. They fear the one who no longer asks for permission, who no longer doubts themselves, who no longer gets trapped in half-truths. You became that person. You chose clarity even when it was painful. And that choice made you unshakable. Because clarity may cut, but it also cleans. It removes illusion and leaves you with reality. And reality cannot be destroyed by arrogance. That is why they kneel now. They kneel because clarity is not something you can argue against. The psychology is simple. Confusion creates space for arrogance because it gives fragile people a false sense of control. They believe if no one understands, they win. But arrogance born of confusion has no foundation. It is a house built on sand. Clarity is the storm that washes it away. You became that storm. By refusing to live in fog, by refusing to accept vagueness, by demanding truth from yourself and others, you turned into a force they couldn't resist. Their arrogance bowed, not willingly, but inevitably. Because arrogance cannot compete with the precision of someone who knows. They thought they were ahead because they spoke louder. They thought their arrogance made them leaders. They thought your quiet was weakness. But your quiet was clarity. Your silence was study. You were sharpening your vision while they were inflating their pride. That's why the shift was so devastating when it came. They never saw you as a threat because you didn't compete in their chaos. But chaos collapses against order, and your clarity was order. They now regret underestimating you because arrogance always bows to clarity in the end. Arrogance is loud until clarity enters the room. Then it stutters. Then it falls quiet. Then it bows. You saw it happen again and again. People who mocked you, who dismissed you, who thought your patience meant weakness, are now silent in your presence. They cannot spin lies around you. They cannot use confusion against you. Your clarity exposes their fragility without effort. They kneel not out of choice, but because arrogance has no weapon left when truth stands in front of it.